Thanks everyone. Let's make a start. It's 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 8th of August 2023 and I declare the agenda briefing for this evening open. I'd just like to make just a quick announcement just in relation to Genes for Genes Day, which occurred actually on Friday the 4th, and that is thanks to Councillor Tuchek for raising that with Council, and to those councillors that were able to, because notice only went out very late in the piece, but the majority of the councillors tonight are actually wearing a pair of jeans tonight instead of what we would normally wear, and just to make the case that 1 in 20 kids face a birth defect or genetic disease like cancer, fibrosis and life-threatening cystic metabolic disorders. It's a really sobering statistic, and Genes for Genes Day raises awareness, and so tonight Council is simply doing that by wearing a pair of jeans tonight and publicising a really worthy cause. And just for those people at home and those who might be listening through other forums, donations can be made through fundraising at genesforgenes.org.au. I hope it's a very successful campaign, and thanks again to Councillor Paul Tuchek. In accordance with City of Canning Policy CM 105, agenda briefings are conducted for the purpose of providing elected members with a forum to ask questions of the City's administration and to receive answers to those questions to enable informed decision-making by Council at the following week's ordinary Council meeting. In accordance with the Local Government Act of 1995, agenda briefings are not decision-making forums. Questions may be asked and answered, and there is to be no debate or discussion. Questions must be specifically relevant to the item being discussed. Elected members and employees must disclose any financial proximity or partiality interest they have in an item to be discussed and declare the nature of that interest at the commencement of the briefing or, at the latest, when the item is about to be discussed. If a member or employee has a financial proximity or partiality interest in a matter arising during discussion, the nature of that interest must be disclosed as soon as possible after the matter has been raised. Interests are to be disclosed in accordance with the provisions of the Local Government Act 1995 as they apply to council meetings. Individuals disclosing an interest other than a partiality interest must not participate in that part of a briefing relating to their interest and must leave the meeting room while the item is under discussion. And just a reminder that agenda briefings are public meetings, and any information provided to the meeting by attendees may be made publicly accessible. Can I also ask, please, councillors and everybody else here present, can I ask you please to turn off your mobile phones, put them away for the duration of this briefing. The briefing is being live streamed via the City's YouTube channel. At item 2 this evening, apologies. We do have an apology from Councillor Hardeep Singh, who was unable to be with us this evening. Approved leave of absence at item 2.2, there are none. Disclosures of interest. CEO Michael Littleton, do we have any disclosures this evening?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In relation to item 3.1, declarations of financial interest, I have received one. The declaration is from Councillor Paul Tuchek in relation to item number EN 01523, award of tender RFT 03-2023, street furniture services and advertising. The nature of his interest is that Thrive Real Estate is owned by Paul and Karen Tuchek, and they currently have 5 signs in Willerton with Y-Stop.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, Councillor Tuchek. Councillor Tuchek, I'll ask you to leave the room when that matter is being discussed, or just prior to that matter being discussed. At item 4, question time for the public. At item 4.1, response to previous questions taken on notice. They will be noted in the ordinary council meeting agenda. And question time for the public this evening. I understand we've received no questions from the public. We only have one member of the public here this evening. Thank you, Sian, and there are no questions this evening. So we will move past item 4.2 to item 4.3. At item 4.3, deputations, there are none. At item 5, items brought forward for the convenience of those in the public gallery, there are none. Reports of committee meetings, there are none. Reports Channel 7, add item 7 reports, the first one being the Office of the CEO. There are no reports from the Office of the CEO this evening. At item 7.2, the responsible officer being Ms Lorraine Driscoll, the Director of Corporate and Commercial, who is on leave. We have Keely Hayward here taking her place this evening. Good evening, Ms Hayward, and thank you for attending. The first item is CC 016 of 23, the title of the report being Land Optimisation Investigation, 96 Barbican Street East in Shelley. The recommendation is on page 7 of the agenda and is on the screen. Councillors, do you have any questions in relation to that item? Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
I have a few questions, Mr Mayor, and I'll ask them through you. Look, if LP 16, which was a draft policy, was adopted by council, what sort of sites would the city have been looking at to purchase in this area, given it's very built out?
Ms Hayward? Oh, sorry, Mr Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, as part of that policy, there was an accompanying background report that identified the areas where there were, I guess, the 400-metre walkable catchment wasn't achieved. So I can circulate that to all elected members. It had concentric circles around the areas where that land would be needed or would be purchased in a certain area. So I can circulate that to elected members.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. Just to clarify, is this lot one of the, like a lot that the city would envisage in buying if it was using the contributions from private developers?
Director?
Through Mr Mayor, I probably have to check that report to see what whether that lot is in that area or not.
Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so this lot is actually, and the neighbouring residential properties, as I've raised previously, and it's mentioned in the report, that fall well out of 400 metres proximity to a playground. If we sell this property, what's the plan to address the shortfall in this area?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, obviously LP 16 was put to council and it wasn't supported. So unless council looks at allocating monies annually through its budget process to look at this sort of thing, or until the statewide policy comes into play, which is one of the items on the agenda, there's no other mechanisms besides those.
Sorry, just to clarify, under our play provision strategy, not under the LP 16.
Thank you. Director Boak.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. Certainly the focus for the play provision strategy since its endorsement has been on the backlog of renewals, and I think council has been quite successful in addressing that, including the allocation in this year's budget. Certainly appointing our relevant staff member in that space is imminent to assist in the review of the policy and a more strategic look at some of those catchments, Deputy Mayor. But we also anticipate that the redevelopment of the district level playground at Shelley Beach Park and some other investments in and around the areas will aim to provide a level of service for play provision, which is commensurate with the strategy. But again, we accept that a more strategic approach and potentially identifying land for those purposes will need to happen in the future.
Thank you, Director Bowe.
Yeah, so I'm just quite, obviously the recommendation is to dispose of this property in an area that doesn't actually have any playgrounds within 400 metres and to allocate all the funding towards the Land Building Development Reserve. I guess I don't understand why the city isn't looking at purchasing or developing public playgrounds in that area, but also why the city's not voluntarily retaining 10% of the land for POS or making a 10% cash contribution as per its proposed LP 16.
I just need a question there.
Why isn't the city voluntarily, as part of this report, retaining 10% of the land for POS or making a 10% contribution as was proposed under LP 16 for a subdivision of 3 lots?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, obviously that policy doesn't exist because council didn't support it. So I hear what you're saying about voluntarily doing it, but if no other developer, including the city, is liable to make a contribution at the moment.
Thank you. CEO Michael Littleton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's probably important to state it would certainly be open to council, should it sell this parcel of land, to invest some of those funds into the provision of playgrounds in either on the foreshore or in proximity. So those are certainly decisions that the city is able to make once it makes the decision to either retain or dispose of the parcel of land.
Thank you. Anyone else before we move on? Thank you. Councillor Sweeney.
Yes, thank you. I see the intention of the recommendation here says that we're looking at selling this property by a private treaty in accordance with the requirements of the policy. Under the Act, we can sell it by auction. Can we sell it by auction, this piece of property, in order to get the best outcome for our ratepayers?
Ms Haywood.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, that is certainly an option. It is the officer's view, however, that our best prospects of the best return from the market will come through a private treaty process rather than an auction, and those reasons for that are outlined in the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Sweeney, anything further?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to the next item. Next item is item CC017 of 23. It's the late item budget review as at the 31st of July 2023. The officer's recommendation is on screen. It also appears on page 2 of the late item agenda. Anyone have a question in relation to that item? Deputy Mayor, and then I'll come to Councillor Bain.
Yeah, I just have a question. There were a couple of items in the carry forwards where it wasn't due to a project being delayed or invoicing not having occurred, but just hadn't spent the budgets, like car park accessibility upgrades, given that that's a relatively small amount every year into car accessibility upgrades. Why only 58% was invested? I think the comment at the in the report is that it's going to design for next work, but I would have thought that the subsequent budget would have had funding for that. And the same as with playgrounds. Playgrounds, there's a 50,000 shortfall spent, and then it was listed as design work for the 23-24 year, when playground funding, we've commented about fencing and that could be done at playgrounds, and why it hasn't been used in last year's budget rather than for design work in the next year's budget. Why is there a number of those that have not expended the money? Park irrigation was the same.
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in relation to the car park underspend, there was a contractor that was engaged to complete those works that was ultimately cancelled towards the back end of the financial year, so we had to carry that commitment forward. In relation to playgrounds, the underspend was, we did budget for the cost of also removing the 3 playgrounds within that allocation. We undertook those removals under the estimated budget at that particular time, and it was felt that we would, rather than spend to the budget, we would carry forward the amount of money to enable us to do some better design work for the delivery of the $1.8 million worth of projects in this financial year.
Thank you. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A few questions, if I may. Is the River Road project one of the proposed carry-forward projects?
River Road, Director.
No, it's not, Mr Mayor. That project is unbudgeted at the moment. It's awaiting the resolution of the land tenure issues and the engagement with the relevant authorities to understand the quantum of that project. Once that's known, we can undertake a budget amendment, remove that or retrieve that funds from reserve and appropriately deliver that project.
Councillor Bain.
So that could potentially occur this financial year, just depending on the resolution of the land tenure, etc.
Director Bowe.
It's unlikely to occur this financial year, Councillor Bain.
Thank you. Anything further before we move on?
A few questions. Sorry, Mr Mayor. These questions I'm happy to take on notice. They refer to the carry-forward schedule. Bridges renewals, $10,000 for Ferndale Road Bridge. I'm not sure what that is. If further explanation can be provided.
Do you want to take that on notice, Ferndale Road
Yeah, I
Bridge?
can take that on notice, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Bain?
Also, car park renewals. When is the upgrade of the Mason's Landing car park going to occur?
Director Bowe.
The contractor, as I mentioned to Councillor Deputy Mayor earlier, the contractor that was engaged for that particular project cancelled. We've had to reschedule that project, but we anticipate over the next 6 or so weeks that will be delivered. The scope of that has changed also, Councillor Bain. There's curbing and some line marking in addition to just the resealing, which that project initially started as.
Yep,
Thank you.
that's great. Public access walkways, lighting upgrade. When will the upgrade to the Karmic Way lights occur? I was of the understanding that will occur before the end of the calendar year. Is that correct?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, we anticipate that those public access way lighting projects will be undertaken in the calendar year. We were waiting on the final specification and design and now the supply of those solar-powered units to deliver those projects, Councillor Bain.
Thank you, councillors. Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, just following on from Councillor Bain's question to Director Bowe, there's 2 line items for car park renewals. One is a car park renewal, one is a car park accessibility upgrades. Are both the underspends related to the same issue?
Director Bowe.
No, they're not, Mr Mayor. We are carrying forward the funds, though, as we haven't allocated any money in the 23-24 budget for that particular those particular initiatives, so we're covering off on those projects with the carry forwards.
Thank you. Councillors, we'll move on to CC 018 of 23, late item, monthly financial report, July 2023, with the recommendation being on screen and also on page 21. Any questions on that item? Thank you, councillors. We shall move then to 7.3. Councillor Bain. Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, just a question just in regards to the Rostrata Family Centre and the additions. I think, I've got 2 questions on that one, but I think just to confirm, is that the one from 2 or 3 years ago with the assistance from our former Liberal member Ben Morton? Is that the $833,000 grant that we're talking about?
LRCI funding. Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't believe the project was 3 years ago, but it was advocated for and was incorporated into the budget previously and will be delivered, will be commenced this financial year.
So that is the one, what I'm reading here, the 833, that's the one we're talking about for Australia, that was the grant?
Yeah, that is the project, Councillor Sweeney.
And it's been going for some time now. Because it's been going for some time, are we looking at any fluctuations in the cost of this project at completion?
Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We really won't know what the cost fluctuations are until the project is tendered. It will be out to tender over the next few weeks, but certainly, you'd anticipate that when the estimates for that project were first cast 2 years ago, there would have been some escalation in the cost of the project.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There are 3 entries for payments to the Department of Justice for infringements, totalling over $2,500. Can the city explain what that's for?
Ms Keeley, are you able to explain that, or do you need
No,
to
I'll
take that
take
on?
the question on notice if I may.
We'll take that
Thank
on
you.
notice. We'll get back to you on that. Thank you, councillor. Thank you, councillors. We shall then move on to the next item, which is 7.3 CD 012 of 23, the title of the report being Consideration of Environmental Conservation Boundary to Inform Scheme Amendment at Lot 500, number 81, Ranford Road in Canning Vale, and the responsible officer being Mr Graham Bride, the Director of Planning and Development. The recommendation is on page 18 of tonight's agenda. It also appears on screen. Are there any questions in relation to that item? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Hall. Just a couple of questions through the Director. With respect to the recommendation, well, the suggestion is that options 3 and 4 are the preferable options. but option 2 basically says that WAPC is unlikely to support given that it doesn't align to the MRS alignment. Why then would option 4 not have the same issues?
Director Bride.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, option 4 does encroach on the MRS reserve, so we have identified in the report that options 1, 2 and 4 have that conflict. Option 3 obviously doesn't, but in comparison to option 4 and option 2, there's some other benefits which are talked about in the report, but certainly all those three of the four options do encroach on the MRS.
Deputy Mayor.
And just one more, if council was to support 2 or 4, are there any consequences besides the lost time? I believe it's 60 days or a couple of months here or there with respect to time in terms of putting an application of the WAPC. Are there any negative consequences if they reject it? Can we just consider a new submission, putting in a new submission later on if that was the case?
Mr Bride.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. So what you're saying is there any are there any issues with proceeding with one of those options and the minister rejects the amendment? You could come back and you could start a new amendment with a different reserve boundary that doesn't impose that particular conflict. Or the minister may in fact say, I'd only be prepared to support it if you modify the boundaries so you are not encroaching into the MRS. So we could get either a rejection, a request to modify, or they could support it. So those three options are all on the table.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Thank you, councillors. We shall... Councillor Bain. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Paragraph 42 refers to some feedback provided by the WAPC that will be distributed to elected members. I haven't seen that. Can that be provided, please?
Yeah,
I
that
might
came
have
through
missed it.
Is that the letter of correspondence from David Caddy?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, that was the correspondence I emailed through. It came with the explanation before the agenda was prepared. There was an attachment with it, but I'm more than happy to resend it. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CD 013 of 23, submission in response to draft Western Australian Planning Commission Operational Policy 2.3, oblique planning for public open space. The recommendation is on screen and also appears on page 35 of tonight's agenda. Any questions in relation to that item? Thank you, councillors. We shall keep moving then. We will move to the next item. Councillor Tuchek, I'll ask you to please leave the room as you've disclosed a financial interest in this matter. The responsible officer for item EN 015 of 23 is Mr Warren Bowe, the Director of Infrastructure and Environment. The report title being Award of Tender RFT 03/2023 Street Furniture Services and Advertising. The recommendation is on page 44 of the agenda and is on screen. Councillors, and for the record, Councillor Tuchek has left the room. Councillor Spencer-Teo.
Just a quick one, and I apologise if this has been asked and answered before, but it's been a while. I've been driving around and noticing that a lot of the infrastructure, especially the one out on Albany Highway and some on the major intersections, are owned by Claude. If we obviously go with a different contractor, would that infrastructure be removed, or do we take ownership of that?
Including, there's a sign right on our front lawn here, isn't
Yeah,
there,
that
by
one.
Claude Outdoor, the directional sign with the City of Canning's logo on it. Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That question may have been asked, but I don't know the answer, so I will ask our Manager of Infrastructure or Service Lead, Ryan Gibson, to come and answer that question for Councillor Spencer.
Mr Gibson, are you able to come forward, please, and try your best to answer that question if you know an answer to it?
Yep. The shelters that are on Albany Highway are, in fact, under a separate contract. When this tender is awarded, those contracts will cease and be rolled into a single contract.
Sorry, I didn't mean the shelters. I meant the actual illuminated advertising signs.
The illuminated advertising signs, we've got a number of them around the city, including one just at the front here on Albany Highway. It's got Claude Outdoor written on the bottom of it, and those ones.
Yeah, sorry, through the... Yeah, so that's covered under a separate contract, so that will remain in place as a separate contract.
Can you just explain that separate contract? How do you mean it's a separate contract, completely separate contract for that infrastructure, is it?
Yes, it's a completely separate contract for the advertising signs that are in place along Albany Highway and other areas within the city. So that's awarded to Claude. It's not part of this tender process.
Can I just confirm then, because I know Councillor Spencer Teo will ask the same question. So you're saying we've got 2 contracts covering advertising signs? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct.
And when is that contract coming to council, or when does that one expire, and how much infrastructure is included in that one?
I don't have those details on hand, so I have to.
Was there an opportunity to amalgamate the 2 contracts into one contract? Was that considered or not?
Sorry.
Director Bowe,
Yeah,
can you
Mr.
just
Mayor,
throw some light on the second contract?
Certainly in section paragraph 5 of the report, we talk about the expired agreements, but we'll give some clarity about the specific Claude outdoor neon signs on Albany Highway, Mr. Mayor.
You'll provide a little bit more information on that one. That would be terrific. Councillor Spencer Teo?
Yeah, because what I'm trying to ascertain is if an advertiser wanted to advertise on that sign or another sign, would they have to go to Claude for one and Y-Stop for another? Or is it all one thing and then a bus shelter's a third contract?
Is that the position?
We'll provide the clarity under separate cover, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions on that Deputy Mayor?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just paragraph 35 talks about the community signage and the contract affords sporting and community clubs the opportunity to advertise. I was just wondering how that would work. Are you able to provide any commentary on the structure?
Paragraph 35, Mr. Bowe.
So paragraph 34 talks about the 35. I'll ask Mr. McKinnon to address that response. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. McKinnon? We might just, I don't think I heard the question there. We'll take that on notice, Deputy Mayor, if you don't mind. Mr. McKinnon, we'll take that on notice. We'll provide a detailed response to the Deputy Mayor. Anything further? Nothing. Just in relation to that contract, and just to make it crystal clear, my understanding there's not a lot of movement on the earlier terms presented to council, but there is a slight net gain over the 20 years of the contract. That's correct?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there is, and it also should be stressed that the price that is contained in the evaluation report is the minimum amount of funding and licence fees that the contractor has put forward. The actual amount of licence fees put forward by the contractor will be dependent on the amount of advertising that they can actually sell and leverage. So we'll recall the previous discussion about whether or not reducing some of the restrictions may influence the licence fees paid to the city. The evaluation process of the submitted price only relates to the minimum amount paid by the contractor. There is potential for the fees paid to the city by the successful contractor to exceed the minimum amount which is contained in the evaluation report.
And the minimum amount contained in the valuation report, we can't talk about that at the moment. Exactly. Okay. We shall then move on with that item, and CEO, you'll grab Mr. Tuchek, or at least ask him to come back in. Thank you. Just for the sake of the record, Councillor Tuchek is now re-entering the chamber. Thank you, Councillor Tuchek. Councillors, in the absence of any further questions on that item, we'll move to EN 016 of 23. The title of that report being Tender Award FM.035.179 Bulk Verge Waste Collection Service. A recommendation being on page 55 of tonight's agenda and also on screen. Do we have any questions? Councillor Spencer Teo has raised her hand. Councillor Spencer Teo.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. While I appreciate that this is just awarding the tender, it's going to attract a lot of public interest, and considering we still have bulk verge collections happening up until the end of the calendar year, have we got a marketing or website update strategy ready to go after this decision's made to make sure that the community are aware that this is not going to happen overnight and there's obviously a rollout process?
Director Bowe, there's a comms plan around the transition.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there is. A new waste guide will be prepared and will be released in January this year, but additionally there'll be a comms plan leading up the transition, the how-to for the community, engagement with the city's cultural and linguistically diverse community specifically on the change in service model, and paid advertising to notify the community of the change. Just a couple of the initiatives we intend to implement.
Thank you.
With the quick and easy ones like website and social media, are we going to be getting onto that pretty much straight away, or is that going to be taking some time?
Director Vo, is that part of the plan?
It is part of the plan pending the decision by Council, Mr Mayor.
Councillor
just finally,
Spencer-Teo?
If the decision is to support the officer recommendation, could we perhaps get a one-pager that could assist us in dealing with queries from the community? Because I suspect there may be a few.
Frequently asked questions. Can we perhaps get something for council?
Yes, we're developing that. We're developing that in conjunction with our customer service team.
It's part of the plan. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Jacobs.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So obviously we've been doing the two bulk hard waste collections for a good part of the last 20 years. Have we asked some of the residents what they think? Because I know that in some other northern suburbs, they took away bulk hard waste collections and it became sort of a mayor level issue to bring it back. So, yeah, have we asked people what their preference is, or we're just going to say, okay, we want to save money, that's what we're going to do?
I'll just get you just to ask whether or not we did ask, but it's probably not entirely relevant to this since we're only talking about the tender, but Director Vo.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, or fortunately, either way, we didn't have to ask. We had over 2,000 people tell us that they were dissatisfied with the service, or inquire about the service, or respond to our current service delivery model. That gave us a fair indication of what the community thought of our delivery of that service.
Thank you. Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you. And so, it might be the details, what you just envisaged, like getting online and picking a week and clicking it, and they come out with a big, steel, what do they call it? Those hard waste boxes that you can, containers? And you just...
Yeah, we've had a SIB on this.
I wasn't there, I'm sorry.
It's recorded for the sake of people like you that aren't had a SIB. You can actually listen to the whole discussion, and then we don't have to sit here whilst all those answers are rehashed in front of 10 people that were at the SIB. So, Director, if you can answer that very briefly, but it's not relevant, Council. We're just talking about the tender. So finding out about the details of what exactly, what type of bins might be dropped, that was all contained in the SIB that we all sat through, the strategic issues briefing. So very briefly, Director, if you don't mind. And then
more or less, the residents have the ability to book a skip bin service. Councillor Jacobs.
Thank you. Any other questions relating to the tender? Thank you, councillors. We shall move on to the next item, and that will be item 7.5. Actually, there's nothing under 7.5 there from the Directorate of the Director of Customer and Community. And at item 8, notice of motion for consideration at the next ordinary council meeting. There is one. It's notice of motion 004 of 23, request for a review of pedestrian safety measures at Pine Tree Gully Road, Willetton, in the school zone adjacent to the Willetton Senior High School. Are there any questions on that item? None. That was a quick night. Thank you, councillors. At urgent business at item 9, there is none. At item 10, confidential matters, there are none for this evening. At closure, there being no further business, I now declare the agenda briefing closed at 6:33 p.m, and I thank everyone for their attendance. Thank you.